Well, hello. My name is Chuck Phillip with South Alabama Home Inspections. Welcome to another edition of Southern Home Talk. This is going to be Hurricane Reggie Part 1 in episode 40. We're going to do a series of these videos because, a lot of the people I do inspections for, they're from out of town and they ask me about the hurricanes and I know there's other videos out there that's informative about hurricane preparedness. But I figured why not do one myself, especially since I'm a veteran of these and been through them since 1964, starting back with Hurricane Betsy. And so I'm going to share some of my knowledge about living through these storms. And hopefully you'll be able to utilize some of this information as well. And it may be a little bit different being hurricane prepared along the Gulf Coast than it would be in other areas. And it's also going to make a difference where you live too. It's what kind of measures you may have to take as far as being hurricane prepared and whether or not you may have to evacuate. Back in 2004 and 5, I believe, that was a pretty busy hurricane season. It was almost stressful to a point to where I pretty much just left my plywood up. I didn't even take it down because it was just one behind the other. It seemed like that was coming through. And so we can get these busy hurricane seasons, and that's something you've got to be prepared for. And you really have to be prepared for the one that's a Cat 4 or higher coming in this area, but even a 3 can be pretty destructive. So the thing about it is you have to be prepared for storms, and that's year round, and not just for hurricanes either, because we have some pretty adverse weather down here along the Gulf Coast, and it don't even have to be during the hurricane season for that to happen. As you can see from this photograph here, it was a pretty busy hurricane season back in 2004 and 2005. It was so busy that I started putting the names up on the plywood every time one would start heading this way. But plywood's really not a good substance to use for storm panels, but it's better than nothing at all. So that's pretty much what everybody did back in the 60s and 70s. I don't think there were any storm panels being made at that time. So everybody pretty much ran to the hardware stores and got plywood and boarded up their windows. But I do recommend that if you don't have metal storm panels, that you go and purchase them and make sure that the ones that you purchase are rated for storm and hurricanes and so forth, because if you get the proper ones, it's possible if you have an older house that you could qualify for a silver certificate. And you have to get an inspector to come out to inspect the house, and if it qualifies for silver level, they'll issue that certificate to you. You can submit it to your insurance company, and it can translate to a pretty good deduction on your insurance, on your wind coverage. So I do recommend that you go out and get metal storm panels if you don't already have them. Now, if you got a new house and it's gold fortified, well then more than likely you already have these panels, and it may even be fabric panels, and they usually store them up in the attic or down in the garage. But I'm glad I kind of mentioned that because you need to make sure you have all those panels in those bags. They're fabric panels, because it's just a matter of time before you're going to need them. And you also want to make sure that they fit, because you're going to be really under the gun when one starts heading this way. You're going to already have a lot of stuff to do already. So the time to try those out is now before one hits. I kind of figured I'd make this slide presentation a little bit interesting. What you're looking at in this photograph is the Blue Gill restaurant down on the causeway, and this was from Hurricane Camille back in 1969. And so Hurricane Camille really never even hit our location. It put some wind in here, and it did a little bit of damage, but the primary place it hit was down here in Gulfport, Biloxi. But you can tell that even though ground zero was in Mississippi, look at what happened way over here. I mean, it put water way up halfway past this restaurant, and it was on pilings. So if you live near water, you need to consider your surroundings there, especially if you're a new resident, you just moved down here, moved into a new neighborhood. you might want to scout out the area to see where the nearest creeks are, ditches, and that sort of thing, because it's possible that storm surge can actually fill up some of these creeks and small rivers. And not only that, but if it rains, and sometimes these storms dump 12, 16 inches of rain, it could fill it up that way and you can have water in the house. So this is something you need to pay attention to. Now, when it comes time to evacuating, you want to be the first one to do that, not the last. And I know it's not something a lot of people want to do. They want to stay at their house, and I don't quite blame you for doing that because all your comforts are there. Your job's there also. You may have to go to work the next morning. But sometimes they issue mandatory evacuation orders. And so if you're paranoid of these storms, and especially if you live in a low-lying area, you want to be one of the first ones to leave, because what can happen is you can get caught up in the traffic nightmare and actually get caught in the storm and traffic. I mean, that's a real possibility. So, if you're planning on evacuating, do it right away and be the first one. Okay, well, this is another reason why you want to be the first one to leave. You can see all this water blown across the causeway here. And what can happen is this storm surge can come well ahead of the storm. And this causeway is pretty much at sea level. And so you can have all this water being blown up across this, 12 hours before the storm even hits. And you may say, well, that's all right, I'll take an alternate route. Well, the problem with that is everybody else is having to take the alternate route too. And so now that highway becomes even more clogged. And the thing is, nothing's really changed since these highways have been built. The causeway was built in 1927, and then the I-10 bridge, I think they completed in 1972. But it's been pretty much the same for the last 50 years. But look at the population growth we've had over those last 50 years. I mean, it's been exponential. And so this really becomes a big problem, during the evacuation process, because we don't really have enough roads to accommodate all that. Sometimes they'll block the roads, before even water gets across it, because for safety reasons. And what you're looking at in this photograph is from 1964, when Hurricane Betsy came through, and it actually did some damage on the causeway. So, and it's not just down here at the causeway where they can close these. I mean, it can be on some of these county roads where some of these bridges are really close to the creeks, and some of those areas can be closed off as well. And so that's why, there again, sounding like a broken record, but you really need to evacuate ASAP. I mean, you need to be one of the first ones to leave, unless you want to get caught up in some traffic jams, which could leave you stranded in a storm. Okay, what we're looking at in this picture here is the completion of I-10. It hadn't been quite completed yet. I mean, there's a few little spans they were trying to finish up. This is probably around 1971. So before we had this I-10 bridge, all we had was the causeway going across. Now this has helped quite a bit as far as relieving congestion, but even without a hurricane evacuation, this is a lot of busy traffic on this, especially during the summertime, and without any hurricane approaching at all, because everybody traveling west to east and vice versa takes this route. So not only that, this I-10 bridge, there's no way to really get off of it if there's an accident on it, or someone runs out of gas, or there's a breakdown. There's just all kinds of problems that can happen up here on this bridge. And that's the same way with all the other interstates leaving north of here. But another thing I want to kind of point out is that this is also a time to check your insurance, to make sure that your insurance is up to date. Make sure that you have flood insurance if you live in an area that could potentially flood. And you may have lived there for 10 or 15 years and you've never had any flooding problems. But like I said earlier, if storm surge comes in here and there's a creek nearby, it's possible, it could put water in your house. And the only thing that's going to cover that's flood insurance. But you also want to make sure that you have all your other insurance in place. And that's something you should be doing, during the fall and winter time. That's what I'm going back to saying. You should be prepared year round. Okay, if you take a look at this photograph, this is from Hurricane Ivan. And what happened here was a big old pine tree just laid over this roof, and I think on this other end as well. And so if you have trees around your house, the time to start working on them and trimming them back is really during the fall and the winter time, because it's not 115 degrees of the heat index outside. And not only that, I think it's going to be a lot cheaper to hire someone to come and do it that time of year as well. But the main thing is you want to have several of these tarps on hand, and the time to buy them is during the same time of year, during the fall and the winter time, because these are the kinds of things you can keep on hand that doesn't go bad. And not only that, it's all it takes is for a hurricane to get in the Gulf, and then you run to the store, so I need to go run to the store and get some tarps. Well, they're going to all be gone. So that's why you need to buy them during that time of year. This is a photograph of my parents' backyard after Hurricane Frederick in 1979. You can see we got trees laying down on the ground. Up here, this is where pine trees had got twisted off about halfway up. So it really created a huge mess. And I remember after this happened, it took years to clean all this up. I mean, it took a long time. And if you look at the bottom tree, how this all got uprooted, it doesn't take much for this to happen to some of these trees. So, be mindful of that, if you got trees around your property. Well, this is a double example. If you look at the top of this tree, this was twisted off during Hurricane Ivan, and it fell this direction and landed on the roof. This here was taken down 2 weeks ago just from a thunderstorm, and it was a massive limb, and it also came down on the roof. So the point I'm trying to make is that's another reason why you have to stay storm prepared year round, because we have some pretty bad weather that comes through, all year long. In fact, back a few years ago, there was a tornado that went right downtown Mobile on Christmas Eve. So, be storm prepared year round. Well, I figured I'd at least show a picture of the limb that fell on my roof. This was a massive limb. I mean, really the picture don't do it much justice. And really, I guess a lot of luck that went in my favor when this happened. There was you can't see it, but there was a tree that was growing up out of this. And so it hit it and it pushed it over. It's actually laying across this way. And so I have no doubt that took some of the impact when this thing came down. And also this limb that runs this way had to fall through this thick bush and then hit the railing, which that probably took some of the shock out of it. But I really got lucky where most of the limbs pretty much hit along the roof edge. I got really fortunate that none of these limbs penetrated my large picture windows. Just got lucky. This is another example of Hurricane Ivan's destruction. I took this picture in Daphne. This was the house across the street from where my aunt lived. And I remember going to the grocery store buying water, and there's people in the store. There's actually one person in the store. He says, I can't understand why everybody's buying water. That's what you got city water. All you got to do is turn the tap on. Well, this is the reason, one of the reasons why you should buy bottled water. What happened in this case was this tree blew over and it busted the water line. So they had no water at all coming to the house. And this can happen to the city service just as well. I mean, some of these trees are planted close to some of these water mains, and so some of those roots run pretty long distance from the tree. So if they fall over, it's possible it could snatch some of the water mains up. So yeah, you're definitely going to want to keep bottled water on hand, and I recommend that you keep quite a bit of it. because that's the only way you're probably going to stay cool after this thing passes over, because your electricity is probably going to be out unless you got a generator. And so as it stands right now, you might drink maybe 1 or 2 bottles of water a day, but when the 115-degree heat index kicks in with no AC, you may be drinking, 15, 20 bottles of water a day. So that's the reason why you should buy a bottle of water. Okay, well, the point, with these videos I'm doing, or these slide presentations, is to try to make these as short as possible, because I realize nobody wants to sit through any sort of long presentation. I'm the same way. So I figured I'd break them up into series, and that'd be probably the better way to watch these when you have time, get bored or whatever. You can scroll through these and watch them at your leisure. But I wanted to end it with this slide here. Back in 2004, when Hurricane Ivan hit, I decided I was going to evacuate for that one. I mean, the radio reports that were coming in, it was going to be a Cat 5. I mean, that did have me a little bit rattled. So I loaded up my truck, and I just bought a brand new 2004 Chevy Avalanche. I mean, I only think it had a couple hundred miles on it. And I'm glad that I had the forethought to go up to the gas station here and fill up 2 5-gallon gas tanks, and I put them in the back of my truck. And we were headed to San Antonio. Well, it's a good thing that I did that, because there was no place you could get gas until you got to Orange, Texas. And if I'd not had those gas cans, I would have been camped out along the interstate with several thousand other people that were doing the same thing, because there was no place to get gas. I mean, it was apocalyptic. I wished I would have taken pictures of all that, but when we were going down I-10, there were people camped out in the median. All the rest areas where people camped out there, it was really something. You'd have thought that nuclear war had hit. And so I was very thankful that I filled up those 2 5-gallon cans. I would not have made it had I not done that. But on the other hand, it's kind of dangerous to be traveling around with gas cans in your car or even your truck, because, gas is extremely explosive and extremely flammable. So if you get in a wreck, it's possible that stuff could ignite and you could burn up inside your car. So, that's just, I figured I'd share that little story with you about my experience in evacuating. And that's why I'm more storm prepared now than I ever have been, because I don't think I'm going to experience that evacuation if I don't have to. I think for my case, it's probably just going to be safer to stay. But everybody has to make that own decision for themselves. Well, thanks for taking the time to watch this presentation. My name is Chuck Phillip with South Alabama Home Inspections. And also, I'd appreciate if you'd subscribe to our channel too, Southern Home Talk. The whole thing is strictly focused to all the issues we face down here in South Alabama. And we're also going to put up some other videos about hurricane preparedness. We're going to try to keep them short too. So stay safe, and thanks for watching.